Hello everyone and welcome to the Franchise Show. I hope you're all doing well. This is the show where we get under the hat, or today, get under the hats of all things franchising. And it's a live show. Well, it's live if it's September the 16th at around 5:15 in the UK and around 12:15 in bits of America. Now, if you are here live, please say hello. Please pop a comment on the screen and get involved in our conversations. And each week on the Franchise Show, we take a different topic and we have a lovely guest. And today is no exception to that. We have a fantastic guest. Now, you might be able to guess the topic today looking at the screen in front of you. But the topic today is wearing different franchise hats. Now, you have two people on the screen that are rather famed for actually and literally wearing hats. But of course, as franchisors and franchisees, we have many roles. And that's what we're going to have a bit of a deep delve into today. You know, what skills, what roles do we take on? What do people who get into franchising, what do they look like as characters and individuals, and what makes a good one? Now, before we get into that, first of all, let me introduce, and everyone will, I'm sure, know Paul Murphy, but Paul, welcome to the Franchise Show.
Hi, welcome. Thanks very much for having me on, Harvey.
Absolute pleasure. And it's great to have you here. Now, I think a great way to start is just if you could give us a little introduction, a little bit of a history about yourself, how you've got into franchising. And look, we've got to talk about how you got into hats as well, and how those two things slot together.
Yes.
So yeah, let us know.
Okay. Well, I spent many years in retail, both in the high streets, in the UK, abroad. And then I went into the duty-free sector. I went into running a business similar to Amazon, but for American Express. And then I got involved with running so I was involved in about four or five business startups. I think the biggest one went to, and then I left and I started up my own business. It was a hobby that went mad. And during that business, I was also doing consultancy work, so business consultancy work, and getting projects here and there. And one of the projects was working with the National Ice Skating Association. And it so happened that a gentleman who was a customer of mine in one of my garages, he said, look, my nipper's just brought over a trampoline park from Australia as an idea. I don't know whether it's any good, but you ought to talk to him because you're obviously into the leisure stuff and you obviously know a little bit about that marketplace. So he set up a meeting in Wandsworth, as it was. And when we got together, and I was looking at maybe putting an ice rink downstairs and a trampoline park upstairs and using the heat exchange from the ice to actually heat up the trampoline park and so on. I was talking there to a chap called John Inwards, who is the managing director of Flip Out. And by the end of the interview, he asked me if I could actually come on board and do some consulting work for him. After a month, I ended up as the marketing director in the franchise space with Flip Out. I had been in franchising before, working for as a consultant in a number of smaller franchises, but Flip Out seemed like a good challenge. At that stage, they'd opened 3 sites, and I think the reason he quite liked me as an individual was that I'd had a broad understanding of, and as we put it, wearing several hats. You know, I've been in marketing, sales, finance, operations, HR, all of those things, and I'd run my own business. And of course, a lot of franchisees, when they come in, they some of them have run businesses already, some of them haven't, and they want an honest and open view about what it's about. But anyway, that was how I sort of segued into the franchising world.
Fantastic. No, I love it. Now, of course, many of you know that Paul is a lovely supporter of this show and supports the last bit of this show where, of course, I switch hats and we find out a little bit about the guest. But of course, this week I am wearing one of Paul's lovely hats for the entire time. maybe we will switch and wear different hats throughout this. But thank you again so much for making this lovely hat, and really do appreciate that. So look, before we get into this, let's welcome a few people who have joined us here live. First of all, we have the lovely Penny Hopkinson. Penny is one of our lovely supporters of the show, and I will put a QR code up when I find it. And while I'm doing that, of course, I always show Penny's book. Penny is the author of this lovely book, which I have got the right way round this week. So please check out her book, but also check out her new service, which is all about using AI and your manuals. So please check that out and contact. Welcome to the Franchise Show. And she's put, hello, franchise friends. Let's have a look what else we've got. We have Steve Barrett with us. Great to have you with us, Steve. And he has put Penny Hopkinson, hello. Well, hello to you as well. I've got a couple more people. We have the lovely Simon Wise, a good friend of the show, supporter, and my partner on our sister show, Franchising Brand Stories. Great to have you with us, Simon. He's put, hello, franchise friends. And finally, we've got Lisa with us, Lisa Feverick, and she's put, hi, everyone. Well, hello to you too. So if you are here with us live, again, please pop in your comments about your experiences in franchising and the different roles you feel we play as franchisors, as franchisees, because that's what we're going to talk about today. And as ever, our conversations are directed and produced by all of you. You can tell us which way to go on this conversation. So it's going to be a fascinating topic. And look, before we get too deeply into that, let's have a chat together, Paul, about what hats we feel we wear. Let's start from the perspective, perhaps, of a franchisor. Now, you've had some great experiences there of working with a franchisor in those early days of beginning the business and, being an entrepreneur. And, if you are looking at franchising your businesses, what skills do you think you need to sort of bring that together? What hat should we wear as franchisors?
Very interesting question, to be honest with you, Harvey, because by virtue of the nature of the people that are starting, or usually starting a franchise, they're entrepreneurs. They're quick moving. They're not necessarily people that pay a lot of attention to the detail. And what they're doing is actually finessing a business model that they feel comfortable enough as proof the business they're in is in fact a viable business, and one that can make enough income to support two businesses. So on the one hand, supporting the franchisor to provide a head office solution and a training solution, a support for both building and establishing and finding sites and all that sort of thing in place, and also enough revenue for the individual franchisee to survive. So you wear a number of hats, but I think probably the principle of the business is very entrepreneurial and very good at strategic vision. And what he really needs is a good team of detailed individuals, people that actually understand a business model, they understand process and procedures, and how to write a good manual to support the business, which ultimately will become the manual that will support the franchisee. And then I think it's how they structure their business to communicate what they've got effectively to their franchisees. Because in my experience, you'll have lots of different types of people that will come to franchising, some of which may not even run a business before. So on the one hand, you're talking to them about your business model, but as a franchisee, you're not actually supporting them to necessarily to run a good business, because that's a whole different ballgame. You've got, on the one hand, you need coaching, supporting, mentoring, whatever, to run a business, and then on the other hand, you need support from the franchisor to be able to run a business using their business model.
Mm-hmm. Mhm. Yeah, I think you made some really interesting points. I think one really valid point for an entrepreneur listening to this either now or in the future is, yes, I think I agree with you that there are lots of entrepreneurs that might consider franchising as a scaling model for their business. But I think you're also right that entrepreneurs are not often details people. They're innovators, they're ideas people. They like getting over a challenge, coming up with sort of new ideas to get around things. And of course, I think that's probably a hat that isn't often worn by a young entrepreneurial business looking to become a franchise. And I think you're absolutely right that that's sometimes where that help is needed, in that details, so that they can not only scale it using franchising, but like you said, it being profitable enough to support two businesses, a business of
Yeah, I
a
think.
franchisee and a franchisor.
Sorry, Harvey. I think in the early stages, it would be a very good idea for the potential franchisor, who's clearly the entrepreneur, to talk with a consulting coaching company that actually can help them to understand, first of all, is this the right way to scale their business? Because there's ways that you can either go through an acquisition trail, a merging, and also how franchisor or the potential the entrepreneur, should I say, want to exit their business and when, because really they need to scale up their thoughts about how they're going to get from where they are now to where they want to be. And it might be that they want, they want 20 or 30 sites around the UK, and they just don't have the funding in place at the moment to do that. And actually, they might not even have the infrastructure in terms of people to do that. And so, in their mind, franchising seems a good solution, but it's not always the right one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's very interesting. I think you're right. You've got to decide whether it is the and look, not every business is suitable for franchising. It's very true. It feels like it could be sometimes, because you think, okay, well, it's just a method of scaling it, but it absolutely isn't. And I think another thing that's worth bearing in mind, if you're a franchisor listening to this, or if you're considering franchising as your growth model, is exactly as you've said there, is what is your end game, your exit strategy? Because it's really important. We talk often on this show about transparency, and I think that, and we also talk often about a franchisee's exit strategy. But I think it's equally important for franchisees to know what the franchisor's long-term plans are, because it's incredibly important for stability. And if they don't know what's going to happen, then it can cause some concerns. Let's have a look. We've got a few more comments coming in. Let's make sure we get to everybody. We have the lovely Leslie Flowers with us. Leslie is a fantastic individual. I'd thoroughly recommend you connecting with Leslie on LinkedIn. And she does a LinkedIn Live on a Friday, all about the book Think and Grow Rich. And it's been very valuable to me. So I'd really recommend you checking that out. Let's have a look. We've got Penny has come back and said, hello, Steve. Great to see you here. We have James from Dubai. He's put, hi, Harvey, and welcome, Paul, connecting from Dubai. Looking forward to the conversation. Well, we're looking forward to the conversation as well. And it's been a good one, even in its early stages of setting this scene as to what roles we're starting to play as franchisors, and what roles and what hats you should consider wearing if you're going to become a franchisor. So really looking forward to hearing your thoughts, James, on the different roles as franchisors, or as we're going to get into franchisees, and we can flip between the two. So please pop in your thoughts on this. We've got a good comment coming up from Simon. We're going to get to that one, I think, in a minute. Leslie has put snazzy hats today. Well, absolutely. And do you know, during the last part of today's show, we are going to probably dip in a little bit more into Paul's personal journey, and we can discover a little bit more about the hats. So please keep tuning in, and we will tell you all about that later. Let's get to this one from Simon here, because this is a good one, I think, to consider and get your thoughts on. Simon's put entrepreneurial qualities indeed in terms of grit and determination and staying power. Yeah, I think really important. What do you make of that as a franchisor here in terms of that grit and determination?
I think you and I on many other occasions have walked around, whether it's the networking events that we go to or whether it's the shows that we go to, and you can invariably identify who is the entrepreneur behind the business. You know, they have this sort of stance about them. They have this quality. They carry themselves in a particular way, and you know they do have all of those qualities. Absolutely right, Simon. And I think it's getting the balance, and also I think the other one is having the ability to actually be able to listen, because a lot of the time, first contact as prospective franchisees, and they all have different expectations, different views, and thoughts. And so I spent a lot of my time in the initial calls just listening and reassuring them, and actually dispersing a lot of the ideas that I have, or supporting them if they're correct, and building on their enthusiasm, helping them to make a measured decision as to whether this might be for them or not. But on many, many times, the actual entrepreneur wants people like myself as head of franchising to convert people into being prospects and getting them through the system and so on. But actually, we've got to do what's right, which is get the right people, because there's no point in getting somebody on that we can clearly see that for some particular trait, and depending on the franchise, you'll soon work out a model for the prospective franchisees. So you know what sort of age group, where they come from, what background they've got, what sort of business experience they've got. And it's not 100% correct, but you do get that feel, and you do open up to that. So I guess it's managing, as part of the team, managing the entrepreneur's grit, determination, and staying power, and supporting it.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and really good point here, Simon. I love that one. I think another thing that I found really interesting about what you said there, Paul, was about listening. And I think, if you put your listening hats on, if there was such a thing, and I'm going to say there is, but actually that reminds me of a story when I was a young salesperson, and I was all chatty, and I expect it was nerves and all that sort of thing. My boss at the time told me to write the word "shut up" on my hand and then sit with my hands in front of me like this, so that I could see it the whole time. Now, it seems a little harsh, but of course his point was exactly that listening is very powerful, and every time you're listening, you're learning. Every time you're asking good questions, you're understanding people's challenges, and you can get yourself in a position where you can overcome them. So I really think that as a hat we wear as franchisors, that listening hat should definitely be up there in the collection of hats behind you. I love it. Great points there. Let's have a little look here as to who else we've got. And we have the lovely Tim Morris with us. Tim has put, "Evening, everyone. Good to be here as always." Well, look at that. How convenient, because Tim, your QR code is, of course, up on the screen right now. Fantastic to have you with us. Tim and Nikki are both part of the bridge, supporting our franchisors and franchisees. So please reach out to them if you would like any help. And Tim, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the hats we wear as franchisors or franchisees. And let's get back into things. I think another thing that I think was important there, you were talking about dispelling some myths. You were talking about supporting people when they make the right, trying to help them make a measured decision. And I think that sort of mentoring hat we wear as franchisors, it's really important to get that transparency and to put across that support, isn't it? It's vital for people to make the right decision and for it to be long term.
I think that the initial thing I find is that they have to trust me, rapport with them. So listen to their story, find out what they're so we send them that information, and I'm sure lots of franchise boards do, and they would have perhaps gleaned a few things and got confused about a few things, and so they've got lots of questions that they want to download. So off the chest first of all and say, I'll come back to that at the moment, whatever, and then get them to talk about their background and their experience and so on. They start to feel a little bit more at ease then. I explain to them my role within the organization and the fact that I can take them through to becoming a prospect franchisee and through their way, but that there's a time when I hand them over to the team, and of course they can have access to me, but our rapport is otherwise limited. But what tends to happen is that because you're the first contact and because you answer lots of the questions, they see you as they do refer back to you quite often, and I think that's an interesting point, is that we, for a while, and when I was working with Flip Out, I came out and came back in, and there was a time when I came out, and within a month they called me up and said, look, we can't do what you do. And I said, what? Pardon? And what it was in fact, because I'm an older gentleman, and
you're not a day over 30, are you, Paul?
Yeah, but you understand what I mean. It's actually being able to and authority believe more about what you're talking around for that particular franchise opportunity.
Definitely. I think someone, staying with them in some way, even if it's just, like you say, they've gone back really into the business, you finish supporting them throughout that journey, but they could give you a call, and you're not going to not take that call. You're not there then for the day-to-day, but you're still there perhaps throughout that journey in some way, and if you're in the town, you might pop in. And yeah, I think it's important for people to understand the hats that the franchise development managers and franchise support people wear. So what roles are they going to play in that journey as they go through it? So yeah, I think it's really interesting. It's interesting to understand how you came, out of the business and back in, because people only miss something when it's gone, don't they? So yeah. Really.
The company's had it's had a couple of different owners, and I was on the board as a full-time member of the team, and then came off. I wanted to do other things as well, and I have a very good relationship with them now. I work part-time with them, which is a very interesting thing for those that are franchisors on here. You don't necessarily have to have somebody full-time. You can have somebody that's got the ability, the experience, and just run them part-time. They don't literally go out and say, I only work part-time, but the actual customers, prospective franchisees, don't know that. They think you're full-time part of the team.
It's true, as long as they get that support. And some might say you flipped in and out of the business, like what I did there. That's good. Excellent. No, I love that. I think you've made some really strong points there about the types of roles and responsibilities that we have as franchisors. And you've got all sorts of people right at the beginning. You were talking about the sort of the different experiences you had. There you go. So the different experiences you had when you got into the business, which was sales, marketing, ops, finance. And look, I think we're going to start to go on to franchisees, and we've touched on this, okay? But I think that franchisees, when they get involved in a franchise, they often have elements of this missing. And before we get into franchise, well, I don't know, I suppose it's the same sort of thing. But one of the things I like to do is ask the question, why what's made you reach out? Why this business for you? Because there's a big story in that as to what's even that very first point of contact. They've made quite a journey to get to that point where they've picked up the phone or filled in the form or made an application. And that's probably been buzzing about in their heads for weeks, months, years, whatever it might be. So to me, finding out that why is really important. I mean, do you have any questions you always ask that you find quite interesting answers?
Yeah, I find out a little bit about their family background. The reason, I mean, look, we're a leisure business, and we have 2 or 3 different brands and different investment levels. We're typically not the first franchise that somebody would go for, although we do have people that come to us who've never run a business before, have perhaps been a teacher or been into a franchise, and it probably isn't the right for them. But on the other hand, we get people that come in that have got multiple businesses. They have got money in the bank. They don't necessarily want to pay their corporation tax on to the government and want to reinvest that money as a benefit for the business to another business. And so there's those sort of conversations are along the lines of how much do you want to get involved? Because with the business I work within, it's quite rare to find a franchisor that actually runs the business on a day-to-day basis, which is an interesting one where we actually put a support structure in place with a general manager and a whole team of management, and then they recruit the staff. So it's then taking their money, and it is really more of an investment. They're managing then upwards to the franchisor and downwards to their general manager, and playing more of a directional and strategic role within their own organization, so that their board can be kept informed of what's going on. But the questions, if you like, are typically asking about the cash involvement, the time involvement, going commitment, the support that we give, and actually their expectations are perhaps set quite high, because they see the brand, they see that we've got 34 outlets here in the UK, and we see 15+ million children a year, and so on. So their expectations are that we've got a huge department, and of course we don't. So this team and enough to support them. But what I also find in our case is that when somebody's made a decision they want to become a prospective franchise, want to find a site right away. And so that's a very big part of managing somebody's expectations is what is the timeline that you have to go through to become a franchisor, and what am I going to go through in terms of an experience? How does that look, and how's that going to affect my day-to-day life? And I'm listening to things like some people may have come out of, I've had people that have come out of the city before now and had a 6-month sabbatical. They've opened up back into their city job and manage the flip out. Those sort of things can happen.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, we've got a couple of great comments coming up actually from Simon and from Tim, and we're going to get to those in a minute. But I just wanted to touch on a few things that you said there, Paul, because again, we're still just about on franchisors here, which is great, because if you're a franchisor listening, or if you're a franchisee asking questions, it works both ways here. Because you can, as a franchisor, perhaps consider some of these things, and as a prospective franchisee, ask about some of these things. But money, time involvement, they're key things. People talk a lot about passion and culture, which are very, very important. They are very important. But with a franchise business, it's an investment into a business. It comes with risks. It comes with money invested. It comes with time invested. And it comes with a potential return. Definitely not a guaranteed return, but it comes with potential returns. And it comes with a model that has been tested. So it's important to sort of get to those things and get to them early on, because people want to know how much it costs, and they want to know when they might get the money back, and they want to know the time they're going to put into the business. And sometimes when you can get to some of those obvious questions early on in a conversation, they settle back down, and then you can talk about some of the other elements and the other hats they might be wearing. I need to get it back on hat terms. But look, love that.
We're probably very similar to most other franchisors in so much as our onboarding process is filling in a number of onboarding forms, doing some due diligence sort of checkouts on the customer's financial position, and then asking them to pay a deposit. But in return, we give them a financial model, support information about the products that we select to go into our venues, a process that we take them through, all those things, so that when we and they actually find a site and they're interested in moving it forward, then there is a model there that they can input all the numbers, and it will give them a sort of pessimistic, realistic, and optimistic view on what might be. But of course, we've got a model that we know works. But what we don't have is we don't have knowledge of their ability to manage a business, and clearly their ability to actually attract and manage good staff. So, and as we know, staff and management make a big difference to any business, not just a franchise business. And it's something that we go to pains at to say to people that, look, we know this works. We can show you. We've got X number of outlets that work not only in the UK but internationally. And don't know though is how you as an individual will work within that model.
Yeah. I always take it back to something that I feel is quite a simple analogy for this. That if you were a carpenter, you would get now it's power tools, but let's say a carpenter a number of years ago, you'd get a box of tools and there would be a hammer and a saw, and a chisel in there, right? But it depends on how you use them. You're getting the tools to do the job. But if you use the hammer the wrong way round, it's not going to bang in very many nails with that. So, we give people the tools to do the job. We know they're good tools. And then you've got to get people trained. There's got to be good support, but they've also got to do some of that work themselves. Let's have a look at a couple of questions that have come in from Simon and Tim. First of all, let's go to Simon's one. Simon's put, when do you need to put your tin hat on as a franchisor, implementing change and innovation in the network? Yeah, but people are naturally worried about change, aren't they? When things alter, people get a little bit insecure and they worry about things. Have you had to manage some changes throughout your time at Flip Out, and how has that gone? And have you had to wear a tin hat?
Yes and yes. I mean, I think as you're probably aware, the psychology, I guess it's referred to, that a franchisee goes through in the early days, that they found something they're interested in, and they actually go through the journey of designing it and opening it with the franchisor. Then they have a sort of honeymoon period where, if they've opened an outlet that's positive in a very good area, they're going to have lots of sales coming in, maybe hyped as much as it would normally be, maybe more in some cases, who knows. And what then happens is that they get into a pattern, and that pattern is obviously the business model that's geared around the temperature and lots of other influences that come onto the business. And there are times when, like with any business, they'll have some tough times and some good times. And if they're not good at their, then they could find that the cash flow, and that's when it starts to get awkward for them, and they need help. Let's say. It might be on the other side that a franchisor might be deciding to change their branding or introducing a strategy that they then got to convince the franchisees. And what a lot of franchisors do, and in fact we are one of them, is actually a fair chunk of the outlets. And of course, owning them yourselves, you can go in there and make any changes that you want, and you've got the control of that. But clearly, over the franchisees, when you want to make advertising or marketing change, for instance, or a brand change, or as Flip Out did, we went from being a trampoline park to being an adventure park, and scaling down the sizes of the trampolines and actually introduce things like Laser Quest and climbing frames and a lot more variety, because one of the things that we rely on is people coming back and repeat business, and therefore there needs to be enough interest there for the average sort of 6-year-old and have their birthday party there and bring their friends and all that sort of thing. Yeah, so managing change is an interesting one, but it really revolves around the strength of communication that you've got and the way that you treat your franchisees, really.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I like this question from Simon, and because there's a use of language here, actually, that I think is important to try and understand. You know, the word change can sometimes be a little bit scary and people can be nervous and anxious about change. But innovation often has positive connotations to it. And what you've just explained there feels more like an innovation. You know, it was something that would allow your franchisees to access more customers, to have those customers be more excited, to want to come back. So yes, it was a change, but it was a change, you know, hopefully for the better, for the experience that the customers would have there. So yeah, really important, that one.
Another one which was perhaps worth mentioning is that we as a company went on the trail of looking at how we could extend the age group for our sites and make it more attractive to teenagers and in fact young adults. And that was a challenge that was perhaps a bit too far for our brand. So what we did was we came up with a which opened up a thing called competitive, and we created a brand called Boom Battle Bar. And Boom Battle Bar was very much open to our existing franchisees to take on another franchise, but within that brand. So that's another very interesting thing where we're managing change. We're showing the franchisees that the marketplace is changing. We are leading, innovating, and developing solutions to meet that, and they can be part of it. And in fact, many of them did. They bought into that business.
Yeah, great idea. Again, you've got to be an innovator. It's got to be a hat you wear as a franchisor. Let's have a look at Tim's comment. It's a big one. It's not going to fit on the screen, but I will read half of it from the screen and half of it from over there. Tim's put, would you agree that one of the major challenges for a founder franchisor is that franchisees are not in the main natural business people? Therefore, many franchisors become frustrated that franchisees do not execute the business model in a way that was intended, delivering suboptimal results. Being a franchisor is completely different from being an entrepreneur. Yeah, we definitely touched on some of those things. What else was there? Of the original business idea, wearing the hat of becoming an exceptional business coach is probably key for a successful franchisor. Yeah, I mean, great point. Sorry
about that, Harvey. That leads into my other role, or one of the other roles that I perform, is as a business coach, and I actually hit on exactly what Tim's talking about. And what I've seen is that those potential franchisees that come in that have got an entrepreneurial streak in themselves, they go so far down the line of becoming a franchisor, and then they can see the light that actually they're not going to fit that well. Somebody that comes in with an open mind, but has got some business experience, maybe run a business already, but actually says, okay, look, I understand this. I can run a business. I've sold that now, or I've got somebody else running that. I'm just going to soak up everything that you come to the table with, and then I'm going to embellish it and improve it, seek to enhance your whole business model. That's the sort of people that you want to come in that embrace the model and actually show the franchisor perhaps the odd one or two initiatives that might improve the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. It's got to be a two-way thing, hasn't it? We are starting to get towards the end of the first part of today's session, but I wanted to sort of talk a little bit more and get the focus switched around now onto the hats that franchisees wear. And you've mentioned this a little bit, Paul, about I suppose the avatar, we might call it these days, but the type of people that choose to be a franchisee, and you know how we can as franchisors classify that. And look, on our sister show, we we would often ask that very question, what type of people choose your business? And this is to all sorts of different franchise businesses. And I've got to say, it was a question I think that franchisors struggle to answer. They would often say, oh, well, they come from lots of different walks of life. They're very different characters. I mean, do you think there are some good ways to try and understand that ideal avatar of a franchisee that's suitable for your business? How do you go about it with the businesses that you're involved
in? Yes, I think the avatar is a good idea. And at the show, we usually have 1 or 2 people on the stand that may not have been on the stand before. And I take them through the type of people that we've already got working for us within the network and how they've got some similarities. And it might be, in our case, we had a few people that have had care homes. We've got people that have had, several other sort of similar businesses to each other. In other words, they've run a business before. They're in their 30s or 40s. They understand the challenges around creating, building a business and the risks involved. And in fact, if the franchise opportunity can actually make enough income revenue to actually support the money due as the franchise royalty, the payment for the investment of building the facilities, and give a return on the investment over a reasonable period, then they're open to that. And so I think they're a bit more savvy, and a lot more savvy, I'd say. And they've usually got their own advisors as well in terms of accountants and lawyers. They're possibly a little bit sure, or some can be a little bit sure of themselves in some cases, but once they get into it and realize that actually if they become a sponge and soak up what's being put in front of them, they're actually going to learn an awful lot about the business, but also about themselves, because it might well be that they don't actually want to be dictated to, shown the way, if you like, with a franchise model, and asked to work within the franchise manual to be able to run their business. They actually would like to open a business for the one that they're interested in, and then put their own flair. But there's that level of flair, and you've got levels from the sort of McDonald's level that basically you have to do what they ask you to do, to something like ourselves, where we will work with people to create a venue that they want to put particular experiences in there for children and so on, but they need to work within our brand guidelines so that our cultural understanding for the children and for the families, and providing them a good facility is at heart.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because another question I always like to ask was, why franchising? And if you ask that question, it's really interesting, because what you get as an answer to why did you choose franchising rather than starting your own children's entertainment or trampolining or care home or coffee or whatever business it is, right? And you ask that question, they say, well, it's because I genuinely feel I've got a few skill gaps, and that I know that the model is going to help me support me through those gaps. Or they say, well, look, I know it can be successful because I've seen other ones, and I've spoken to other franchisees who are telling me it's successful. So I know that if I can follow those rules, it can be successful. But you're right. I like that, to become a sponge, and maybe people should wear a sponge hat. But I think
the other
point.
Yeah.
It's a great point. What I'm going to do is we've got a couple more questions come in actually from Steve. So I just wanted to bring up these actually before we conclude, because it's always good to get to everyone's points on this. Steve's put, when a culture is franchised along with the brand, it reduces the chances of everyone grabbing the hard hats and avoid the franchise front line. Yes, and I like that. I like the use of these different hat metaphors. Culture, that's really important, isn't it, in a franchise business? And it can be tougher to replicate culture than it is to replicate process.
I think the thing is that never underestimate the power of the brand. On many occasions, people have said to me, well, if I open one trampoline park, I'm 1 in 200. If I join you with your brand, you control 35% of the market. I'm part of something that's much bigger, and the value of that business are as part of a group of 35 and the value of a single individual site that's not within the brand, franchised brand.
Yeah, that's it. You get the power of something that can be bigger than you could have created, certainly at the beginning. Yeah, love that. It's a very good point. We have actually now come to the end of the first part of today's show. Now, of course, the second part, this is the part where I switch hats to this hat normally, but I'm still going to switch hats because the lovely Paul, of course, he doesn't just make me one hat, he's made me two, because he's a lovely sort of guy like that. So I'm still going to switch hats. In fact, Paul, you could also switch hats maybe as well. But anyway, look, there you go. Another absolute beauty.
I'll switch hats.
That one. That's a beauty.
That's a big baby, isn't it?
Now, of course, that's it. Now, of course, this part of the show is, of course, sponsored by Paul and at PJ Murphy and Sons, Bespoke British Hatters. So if you would like a lovely hat like the one that I am wearing and the one that the lovely Paul is wearing, then please reach out to Paul on LinkedIn or scan the QR code that's on the screen right now. Now, this is a lovely part of the show, and this is the part of the show where we generally ask the guest a silly question about if they've met someone famous or that type of thing. But I think as it's all about hats today, and all of those lovely hats are behind, I think what we're going to ask Paul is to give us your story behind the hats and how you've got into that. And just before you do that, you then get a chance to ask me any question you like, just to get your own back on me, because of course you have answered these questions beautifully. So look, you don't have to, you can let me get away with that as well. But before we do that, let us know a brief story behind how you've got into hats.
Harvey, I had a bit of a health scare. I've got a mark and they thought it was cancerous. And as it happens, I also had a mark in my mouth and they thought that was cancerous. I went to the doctors, went to the specialist. It's not, thankfully. But what they did say was, look, because I haven't had any hair on my head since about 18 years old, or very little anyway. They said, look, Paul, because you're getting of a certain age, it's more important that you wear a hat. Now, I was wearing baseball caps and thinking, I can't wear a baseball cap with a suit. That just doesn't go. And then I looked at regular trilbies, fedoras, and they were very expensive to buy them from a London hatter's. And then I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll buy a second-hand hat. So I bought a second-hand hat, but I didn't know what I was buying. So I didn't know that there's various materials, various weights, styles. And the big thing was that actually, as a hat gets on in life, it can actually reduce in size because it gets wet with the weather, it dries out unnaturally because people put them on top of a radiator or something and they shrink down. So I was buying hats that I thought were my true size. And by the way, the American size hats, a 7.5 is actually a 7.25, I think it is, rather than a 7.5 in the UK. So the hat sizing changes from country to country, which makes it even more complicated. So I was buying second-hand hats. They weren't fitting me. So I was working out, how can I make this bigger? Or how can I restore it? So I restored it to a level that I could then sell it on. And I learned an awful lot about hats. So through watching YouTube videos and actually through doing other things and talking to a few people, and I sort of nurtured that, and I was beginning to get quite a lot of money from it, which I then invested into equipment. So I bought all the steamers, and I bought 3 different sewing machines. I bought the stamping for the gold blocking and the machines for the big investment made, but that was all funded by the activity that I did on buying and selling hats. And then I researched materials and thought, well, because I couldn't really find what I wanted, why don't I make a hat? And what I really wanted was this sort of style 1940s hat. And what I then realized was that there was woolen hats, which when they get wet, they become very difficult to reshape back in, and they're not particularly waterproof or anything. Then there's rabbit felts. Then there's actually a combination of rabbit and beaver. And then you've got things like this, which is 100% beaver. Now, these sell for anything between sort of, by my competitors, from sort of £400 to £2,500. And so I then started to research and bring all the felts in from Portugal, from the world's best manufacturer of felts, and I buy the leather inside here from America and import that, and I make all the linings up myself. So I started to do all of that. I thought, well, at the same time, I was developing my business coaching business and consultancy, and I'd always been a sort of marketing manager, marketing director, and I had a team of people working for me. I hadn't been used to getting in front of the camera, so I then decided to create a YouTube channel called Passion for Hats. Now, Passion for Hats has now got 107 videos on it. It's got a few hundred followers, I think nearly 400 followers, and a lot of those are my customers. So all of a sudden, I learned how to be in front of a camera, how to actually restore and make hats. I created a website, and I now sell anything between sort of 15 and 35 hats a month. So it all really around my health issues, but with a view to when I come to sort of semi-retirement, I'd have something to top up. There's not many of us have got a decent pension these days, so I haven't, and need to do something. But it's also from a boredom point of view that I wanted to do something that was fun and that I could leave a bit of a mark. And actually, I'm now mentoring 3 or 4 young hatters around the world. I go on a number of hat shows around the world to be a bit of an authority on what I do now, believe it or not. Yeah, it's lots of fun. And what one of the nicest thing is that when somebody like yourself, wants a hat, then we sit down and go through a consultative approach, very similar to franchising, actually, because I'm listening to what do you want a hat for? What are you going to use it for?
Yeah.
Do you want a lightweight, a dress weight, a Western weight? Are you going to wear it as a sun hat? Or are you going to wear it, for all these different reasons and so on? And then I feed it all back to them. And there's about 20 different elements of building a hat. So we have a checklist to go through all of that, and they truly come up with a custom hat, and then we custom measure them and so on. So I make the hat on these wooden blocks, and then I form all the shapes. Then I can actually cut a template to their head, like we did for you with a wooden template, so that when I've made the hat to its nearest size, I can then steam it to the actual size of the client's head.
Amazing.
And so it's a fun journey for me, and it's something that many people seem to like. So great, yeah, love it.
Great story. Thank you so much for sharing that, Paul. We've almost run out of time, so we probably haven't even got time to ask me a question. So unless there's anything absolutely you're itching to know, then I might have got away with that. So it's the first time. I'm delighted. Anyway, so look, I would like to thank everyone who has been here today in the audience. You really are what makes this show special. Your direction in these conversations is always fascinating, and you add a huge amount. And I'd, of course, like to thank Paul, not only for your time today and sharing your experiences, and for my lovely hat and supporting our show, but also for being involved so wonderfully in the world of franchising. You add a huge value there as well. So thank you so much for being part of the show today. Now, finally, before we say goodbye, it leaves me to talk about what's happening next week. So next week on the Franchise Show, we are talking about finding fantastic franchise folks. That's difficult to say, but we're talking about obviously hiring great people within our franchise businesses. We've got the lovely Nick Pleven coming on, and Lee Fowle, who is a franchisee at Specsavers. So it's going to be a great episode, great to get that perspective from a franchisee. And really looking forward to it. So please join us September 23rd, 5:15 GMT, 12:15 PM EST. And until next time, take very good care.